Councillor Blundell for this part of the meeting. He's had to attend an important, urgent other meeting on council business. Okay, we'll now receive the capital strategy for 2024 to 2025, and I will hand back to the Chief Officer of Finance, Performance and Change. Carys, please.
Thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is to present to Cabinet the capital strategy for the period 2024-2025 through to 2033-2034, which includes the prudential indicators against which the Council measures itself during the financial year, and the annual minimum revenue provision statement before submitting this to Council for approval. Local authorities are required to determine a capital strategy which demonstrates that the authority takes capital expenditure and investment decisions in line with service objectives and properly takes account of stewardship, value for money, prudence, sustainability and affordability when making these decisions. And this strategy must be approved by full Council. Local authorities should have in place a capital strategy that sets out the long-term context in which capital expenditure and investment decisions are made, and gives due consideration to both risk and reward and impact on the achievement of priority objectives. The proposed capital strategy for the period 2024-25 through to 2033-34 is attached at Appendix A of today's report. It sets out the Council's plan for capital expenditure and how the programme is to be funded over the coming 10 years. In developing long-term investment decisions, it is crucial that decisions are based on clear information, including a long-term plan of management plans. Where capital investment is needed to deliver the Council's priorities, this strategy is the framework that the Council can rely on to develop a clear, consistent and informed process in undertaking capital investment decisions. This document is presented as an integral part of the Council's budget and policy framework. It links with the corporate plan, the Treasury Management Strategy, the Medium-Term Financial Strategy and the Council's Asset Management Plan. There are 13 principles which drive the budget and spending decisions of this Council, 3 of which refer specifically to the capital programme. These are that capital investment decisions are in alignment with the Council's capital strategy and mitigate any statutory risk taking account of return on investment and sound options appraisals. Prudential borrowing is only used to support the capital programme where it is affordable and sustainable within the Council's overall borrowing limits and the revenue budget over the longer term. And decisions on the treatment of surplus assets are based on an assessment of the potential contribution to the revenue budget and to the capital programme. To reflect this, the capital strategy is based on the guiding principles. These are that capital investment is focused on the delivery of the Council's wellbeing objectives and priorities, that there is strong governance over decision making, that we ensure capital plans are affordable, sustainable and prudent, and we maximise and promote the best use of the available funds. The plan details how any proposed investments in land and buildings will require the completion of a full feasibility study to evaluate the practicality of the capital project and to assess its deliverability before the Council invests time and money into that project. As reported to Council throughout this year, there are financial pressures arising in our existing capital programme, and it's anticipated that this will continue for some time going forward. These pressures include increased prices of materials as a result of higher inflation rates, supply chain difficulties, and the inability to recruit to key posts. The strategy also refers to the changes with regards to the ability to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board to invest primarily for financial return. When seeking to borrow from the PWLB, authorities will be asked to confirm that there is no intention to buy investment assets primarily for yield in the current or the next 2 financial years. Whilst this does not preclude the Council investing in commercial activities, investing in assets solely for yield would prevent the Council from accessing the Public Works Loan Board borrowing. As the Council will need to borrow to support the modernisation of our schools programme and the wider capital programme, this would prevent the Council investing in land or property purely to achieve a financial return. Major capital projects require careful management to mitigate the potential risks which can arise. The effective monitoring, management and mitigation of these risks is a key part of managing the capital strategy. In Section 3 of the strategy, details are contained which outline the robust process in place to approve, manage and then monitor capital projects. As members are aware, quarterly capital monitoring reports are prepared for Cabinet and Council, which include details of any variances between projects, as well as projections of likely year-end spend. In the coming financial year, the Council is planning capital expenditure of £113 million, and this is summarised for you at Table 2 within the Capital Strategy document. The main capital projects to be undertaken in that period are detailed within the strategy. The Council has several funding streams available to support capital investment, and these are detailed for you in Appendix 1 of the strategy. We do receive support from Welsh Government towards the cost of capital, and this funding is prioritised towards investment that is required to meet health and safety requirements. There are currently no nationally imposed restrictions to the level of borrowing that the Council can incur to pay for capital investment. The Council approves its own affordable borrowing limit. There are two main types of borrowing to pay for capital investment. The first is supported borrowing, and the costs of servicing the debt are included within our annual revenue support grant that we receive from Welsh Government. The second is unsupported borrowing, the cost of which has to be met from the Council's revenue budget. Finally, each year the Council must set aside a provision for repaying external debt. This is known as the minimal revenue provision. This provision needs to be approved by Council before the start of each financial year, and the policy statement with regards to this can be seen in Section 7 of the Capital Strategy. When agreeing the Council's capital programme, members must be aware of the revenue budget impact of capital schemes, and this would include the costs of operating or maintaining a new asset, the capital financing costs of servicing any borrowing required to pay for investment, and also then the revenue costs of preparing and delivering projects. The percentage of the Council's revenue budget that is committed to capital financing costs is increasing in the longer term. Given the pressure on revenue budgets, this limits the affordability of other priorities in future years and should be a factor considered by members when determining the capital programme. If I may, Leader, I would just take you now to the recommendations at Section 9 of the covering report, which is the Cabinet consider this report and recommend the capital strategy, including the prudential indicators, be presented to Council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Carys. Councillor Williams, please.
Mike. Yeah, okay. I certainly welcome the report and happy to move the recommendation. I understand this has been through a scrutiny process. I just very quickly looked at the scrutiny recommendation. I think the only recommendation is that they wanted to have a look at it a little bit earlier in the process, wasn't it? Was there any other formal recommendations regarding this from scrutiny?
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams, and we were part of that recent meeting overview and corporate overview and scrutiny committee, and welcome the review of this strategy. So, Carys, can you remind us of their thinking on this strategy, please? Thank you.
I've got a follow-up question too, Leader.
Thank you, Leader and Councillor Williams. Overall, they approved the strategy. They did talk about risk within the strategy, and more particularly in the Council programme. The only other thing that has come up through the recommendations from COSC is that the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel process has the opportunity to look at the capital programme and feed into the development of it going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And I certainly welcome the 4 outline principles of the capital strategy. But I would just like to sort of take members, I suppose, to the penultimate bullet point on the 4th principle, and that is about effective pre-post project appraisal, including a lessons learned exercise. And I'm just wondering, I think it's quite important that we document that, and maybe that document is made available for inspection.
Thank you.
That's the only comment I'd like to add, and happy with the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Carys, please.
The issue of project appraisal and lessons learnt has been raised previously in scrutiny committees, and it has been agreed that we will, certainly for the larger schemes, we will take those appraisals back through scrutiny committee so that we can all share the learning from that.
Thank you for that, Carys. Next is Councillor Spancer, please.
Thank you, Leader. And first, I would like to second the report. And I would just draw attention to one part of the report, which is very useful from a highway point of view. On page 188, refers to the Highway Asset Management Plan, HAMP, and points out there that we have a statutory duty to maintain our highways and ensure they're available for safe use by all. And it's a subject perhaps for another day we need to return to discuss in more detail to make sure, because we've committed to put in, and we are putting additional capital money into resurfacing our highways, but we need to be clear how much is really needed in the future and that we're trying to match that need. And I know there's draft reports been done, but we need to have a future report, I think, at the right point about what finance is needed to keep our highways safe and so they don't deteriorate. And it's quite clearly we have a highway asset management plan which points out that we should be doing that. We have a statutory duty to do that. So I think following from this report at the right point in further this year, we need to have that further cabinet report or a cabinet report to be clear where we head in the future with our highways maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Spanzik. Carys, do you want to respond to Councillor Spanzik's point, please?
Certainly, I think what we've made clear in the plan is because there's limited capital funding available at the current time, we haven't asked services to identify new projects to come forward. However, once we've closed this year's accounts and we know what we have available, we will be bringing a further report back which would identify any possible new schemes that would need to be funded. And I'm sure then that colleagues in communities will input into that with regard to the particular issues that you've raised.
Thank you for that, Councillor Spanzik. I think it's timely to review that highway asset management plan, and we have the head of service here. It's a very important plan for the authority, isn't it? And it does need that review, doesn't it? Because the highway infrastructure does change. We've got a growing highway network in the County Borough. We've seen quite significant development over the last decade in particular, and some of those new structures will require a different approach going forward because where they are in their lifetime. So thank you for flagging that, Councillor Spanzik. Councillor Good is next, please.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Carys, for taking us through the report. If I could just take colleagues to page 191 of the report pack, which is page 11 of the strategy itself, under commercial activities. I just wanted to sort of explore, it lays out quite clearly in here the change to the Prudential Code and how we can borrow and that we can't borrow to fund profit from investments as a primary reason. But just looking at the sort of outline of what our investments in terms of commercial property is, it says it's primarily in office space, which obviously following the pandemic is perhaps something we need to review and whether that is still an effective investment. And I wondered if any thought had been given to reviewing that portfolio itself fundamentally, but then whether more investment could be looked at from sale of that into housing or temporary accommodation, which would not therefore be primarily focused on profit, but perhaps would derive us an income. Just as a, for one of our many other chats on housing rather than finance.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Good, and I will bring Carys in as the Chief Officer for Housing amongst your many responsibilities, as well as Chief Officer for Finance. Carys, please.
I suppose firstly answering then in my finance role, within the revenue budget, we've talked about reviewing all of our assets and whether or not we need to continue to keep them, and if not, what we should do with them, and also how we can better use them. So that is certainly something that is ongoing. I then, from my housing point of view, would say that we are working very closely actually with the Corporate Landlords Action with regards to the properties that we have, to see whether or not there are any opportunities at all for us to use them or modify them for use within, our housing, particularly for temporary accommodation. So that dialogue is well advanced as well with colleagues in corporate landlord.
Thank you for that, Carys, and I will take the opportunity to remind those colleagues and members of the public who are listening that this is about finance for commercial activities, but also we always take the opportunity, and I know it's a focus for our overview and scrutiny committees, we do take the opportunity to secure a grant and use it to generate income for the authority. I'm particularly pleased that, for example, we will be using UK government money, shared prosperity funding, to develop new units at Village Farm Industrial Estate in Pyle. Now, not only will that create space for new starter businesses, small and medium-sized starter businesses in the county borough, but it will also generate income for the authority and create new assets that the authority will own. Thank you for... Carys, did you want to come back on that?
I suppose just to be clear on that, the new regulations are to stop us going and investing in things which local authorities would not ordinarily be running. So there are examples of other local authorities outside of Wales who have invested in hotels and things like that as income generating. That's what this legislation is guided at. So when you raise the issue about could we modify any of our buildings for housing, we would obviously get an income possibly on that, but the main purpose of doing that would be enable us to meet the needs of people who need temporary accommodation in the county borough, and that is a valid use of monies for us to do. So that's the differential between what we could borrow for and what we couldn't.
It's almost a secondary factor, isn't it? That it is to be welcomed, just as it is with the industrial estates. Our primary purpose for developing those units of Village Farm Industrial Estate will be because we have a shortage of that accommodation in the borough and we want to support new businesses. But it will also generate some income for us and create an asset. Councillor Good, please.
Thanks, Lee. Just to come back on that, I think just to be clear, where my head's going at is whether actually the current portfolio we own, the properties themselves, are still the type of thing that would derive a good income, because a lot of it is rented office space, which, because of changes to working patterns, etc., since the pandemic, whether that is still the most sound investment. And in fact, perhaps there is some opportunities to dispose of those investments to purchase other accommodations, which we then would own as potential housing and or rental properties.
I'll bring our head of corporate landlord function in, who happens to be here on this. I know that most of our corporate landlord estate in that respect is still within industrial, but we do have some office accommodation, and indeed we have a proposal within the budget, don't we, to look at, for example, a different use for Ravens Court, as well as for the estate that we have at Bridgend Science Park as well. So can you just confirm that, please, Zach?
Absolutely, Leader and Councillor Good. I mean, we very much want to both rationalise the estate, make best use of what we have. There are commercially high demand areas, small, medium enterprise business units, small industrial uses, loads of demand for stuff like that. So what we don't have actually is a lot of vacant, empty, areas in our portfolio. I think commercially we've got Pandy Depot and the wood chip site, which are about the only two which are in our MTFS proposals in order to make improvements. But yes, we're with the office stock. We are looking at it. There are already proposals in the MTFS regime to make improvements there. I would maybe curb a little bit of enthusiasm around conversions, because I quite strongly suspect in many cases the cost of converting something that was purpose-built and designed as an office into residential accommodation, the cost can sometimes be so extreme that actually you're better off demolishing the building and starting again. So it's a case of about land use then. Is that the best land use? Should it be an office complex, or should it be taken down and something else built instead? It's not easy to turn something from office use into residential accommodation. I just want to be a little bit realistic about that, but absolutely making sure we've got best use of our portfolio across the board is an ongoing process. We're doing it as we speak, and we will continue in that vein as we move forward.
Thank you for that, Zach, and thank you for raising that. Comes good. Deputy Leader is next, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. So just a couple of questions from me. I'm very conscious reading this report that I sat watching the news last week about the MIM model. And it was about a mutual investment model so that partners build and maintain schools, but they weren't maintaining schools. And so I suppose for me, one of the questions I need to ask is what risk is there to us as a council, appreciating that this was the English model. However, I think we need some reassurance that the risks that it poses to us. And the other thing I was going to ask you is how much of our cash, so to speak, how much of it has been made as a loan to other bodies for to support their capital programme, because that is part of how we can use this money. And how risky is that? Because, you referenced other local authorities buying hotels and using that as income generation. I know we're pretty much restricted in Wales, but I think we need to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. A couple of questions there. One may be drifting off a little, though it is connected actually in terms of treasury management. You could say that actually it's a question on capital strategy and treasury management, isn't it, in terms of the in terms of any loans and borrowings. Yeah.
Well, Leader, just to clarify, this is page 27 and it's point 4 under the prudent minimum revenue provision policy and statement for 23-24 under the capital strategy. So whilst I appreciate it's actually in our capital strategy programme as well.
Yes, I'm saying it cuts across both, but I'm sure Caris will respond to that, and possibly the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support can speak to the point about the MIM model, because it's not the same it's not identical to the MIM model, Lindsay, but we do have an example of a PFI school, don't we, in Bridgend Cymru Borough Maesteg secondary school, and I'm sure you'll confirm that actually in terms of the maintenance of that school, that is in line with the contract, with the arrangements that we have in place. But please confirm that. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. It's a really good question, actually. The PFI and the mutual investment model, obviously they both finance managed from a revenue budget. The difference is with the PFI model that was referred to in some of the recent press articles relates to an English model, and my understanding of that model is it looks at all forms of maintenance within the school. So I think it referred to things like cutting the grass on a playing field. It referred to all sorts of cleaning facilities for the schools. Now the arrangement we have with our PFI is not similar to that. It's a slightly different one. It looks at hard facilities management. The mutual investment model is a different one again. That's a model that's been developed by Welsh Government. And again, in this model, as it refers to in the capital report, this is where private partners will work with the local authority and they'll maintain public assets over a period. And at the end of the period, then they hand it back to us at the end of the borrowing period. So again, they are slightly different mechanisms, really, of borrowing money, as I see it.
Thank you for answering that question. And then the other question from Deputy Leader about loans and investments in other local authorities, please, Gareth.
Certainly when we make loans or investments with other local authorities, they're not linked to specific schemes or anything. They will be to help them to manage their cash flow. And we do a lot of due diligence around where we place our money. And so, for instance, where we know of local authorities who may be having financial problems, we wouldn't be placing with them until we were sure that those problems were resolved. The bit that you're talking about in the report, Councillor Gebby, is about where loans are made to other bodies for their capital expenditure. As I said, if we are able to make loans to other organisations, other than our investments, though, if you see what I mean, we wouldn't normally make a loan to another organisation. So we can lend to town and community councils, but we don't normally, because they are able to pull down money from the Public Works Loan Board in exactly the same way that we are.
Thank you for that, Gareth. I can't see any other members wishing to speak. I'd like to welcome Councillor Blundell back to the meeting, but fortunately, because you weren't here for all of the debate, you won't be able to vote on the capital strategy. So strategy has been moved and seconded. Is everyone in agreement, please? Thank you, colleagues. And we will now move on to the Treasury Management Strategy for 2024 to 2025. And this is the final report of the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change at today's meeting. Back to you, please, Gareth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. So the purpose of this report is to present to you the Treasury Management Strategy for the coming financial year. And this includes a borrowing strategy, a Treasury investment strategy, and also our Treasury Management indicators. And these have been presented to you prior to them going to Council for approval. So the Treasury Management functions of the Council are regulated by the Local Government Act 2003. This provides authorities with the powers to borrow and invest, as well as providing controls and limits on this activity. In accordance with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance's Prudential Code for Financial Management, the Council must approve a Treasury Management strategy before the start of each financial year, which should set out the Council's and the Chief Financial Officer's responsibilities, delegations and reporting arrangements. The proposed strategy for the coming financial year is attached as Appendix A to this afternoon's report. The Council undertakes its Treasury Management activities in accordance with the Prudential Code, which has been updated to reflect changes in an increasingly complex environment and to complement changes to regulations. The Code requires that formal and comprehensive objectives, policies and practices, strategies and reporting arrangements are in place for the effective management and control of Treasury Management activities, and that the effective management and control of risk are the prime objectives of these activities. The Council has an integrated Treasury Management strategy where borrowing and investments are managed in accordance with best professional practice. The Council will look to borrow money if needed to either meet short-term cash flow needs or to fund capital schemes approved within the programme. It is important to note that any actual loans taken out are not generally associated with particular items of expenditure or asset. The Council is exposed to financial risks, including the potential loss of invested funds and the revenue effect of changing interest rates. The successful identification, monitoring and control of risk are therefore central to our Treasury Management strategy. Should anything change significantly, a revised strategy will be presented to Council for approval. The ongoing impact on the UK of the war in Ukraine, together with higher inflation, higher interest rates, uncertain government policy, and a deteriorating economic outlook, will be major influences on our Treasury management strategy for the coming year. As of the 31st of December 2023, the Council held £99.79 million of borrowing and £85.5 million of investments. The external debt and investment position is shown for you in Table 1 within the Treasury Management Strategy. The strategy highlights that it is anticipated the Council may need to borrow during the next 3 years. However, this position can change should capital schemes not progress as anticipated, or conversely, further schemes are added to the capital programme that are not fully funded by grant or revenue contributions, or new schemes are added which require additional debt financing. The requirement to borrow will need to be monitored on an ongoing basis, and any new borrowing will be considered alongside any changes in the capital programme that may affect the level of borrowing required. When borrowing money, the Council's primary objective is to strike an appropriately low-risk balance between securing low interest costs and achieving certainty of those costs over the period for which funds are required. The strategy outlines that the major objectives for the Council with regards to borrowing in the coming year will include minimising the revenue costs of debt, managing the Council's debt maturity profile, reschedule any debt if that's appropriate, or to optimise the use of all capital resources, including borrowing, usable capital receipts, revenue contributions to capital, and grants and contributions. In November 2020, the Treasury issued revised lending terms for the Public Works Loan Board borrowing by local authorities. The Public Works Loan Board is a major source of any borrowing that the Council would undertake. And under these new requirements, as the Section 151 officer, I would be required to confirm that capital expenditure plans do not include an intention by the authority to borrow to invest primarily for financial return. I can confirm that the Council does not intend to invest in that way. As I outlined earlier, at the end of December, the Council had £85.5 million of investments. The Council's main objective when investing money is to strike an appropriate balance between risk and return, to minimise the risk of incurring losses from defaults and the risk of receiving unsuitably low investment income. The Council may invest its surplus funds with approved counterparties, and these are detailed for you at Table 6 of the Treasury Management Strategy. The table also details the time limits and upper financial limits that will apply to each of those counterparties. During 2024-25, Council will receive reports as required in line with the requirements of the Code of Practice. This includes an annual Treasury Management Strategy, which you have today, but also a mid-year monitoring report and an annual Treasury Outturn report. So if I may, Leader, I just take you to the recommendations at Section 9, where it's recommended that Cabinet consider the Treasury Management Strategy for 2024-25, and also that you recommend the strategy be presented to Council for approval on the 28th of February. Thank you.
Thank you, Caris. I'll bring Councillor Williams and then the Deputy Leader. Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Happy to move the report. I note on Table 4 that we are looking to take out some borrowing up to the end of March 25, and that's rising then to 26 and to 27. So we're going to new borrowing of 15.8 million as of 31st March 25, and rising to 27.63 million as of 31st March 27. So I suppose the question is, I mean, that is new borrowing. There is an expectation, I suppose, that our reserves are held at around 5%. Is there any guidance on the maximum amount that the authority can borrow, or does it? No. What guidance can you offer on that?
Caris, please.
Sorry, Leader. No, there is no limit to what we can borrow. But what we have to do is be prudent when we do it. So we need to take into account of what we're borrowing that money for and whether or not it fits within our capital strategy, which you just approved. We also need to make sure that actually we can service that debt. So when we borrow, we have to make a revenue contribution towards that. We have to ensure that actually the money is there within our revenue accounts to be able to repay that debt. And so through the Treasury Management Strategy, we do monitor that. We have indicators to monitor our level of borrowing to make sure that we don't take out or borrow money, one, that isn't needed, but more importantly, that we can actually afford to repay that money over the period.
Thank you for that. Caris, next Deputy Leader, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to second the report. Thank you, Caris. I suppose I've got a couple of questions, really. You've talked about an £85 million investment that we have. Would we not be worthwhile getting that back into the council coffers rather than taking out loans, is my first question. Or do we earn more money by investing and getting cash back? And the other question I've got is, well, if we're considering any loans, could you tell me what our credit rating is currently, please? Because that will have a significant
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Caris, please.
Your first question is about why are we making investments? Why don't we use those rather than borrow? Actually, we are using our internal monies, which meant that we haven't actually borrowed as a council since 2012. Because we have had reserves and we have been able to fund our spending through those reserves and through the investments. We always monitor this money. At the moment, we don't need to borrow. Therefore, the money, we have it, we don't need it, and therefore we're placing it out and it's earning us interest. And actually, one of the good things about the current inflation rate and interest rates is actually our money is currently working a lot harder for the council now than it was this time last year. But what we do anticipate is that over the next few years, actually the amount of money we have to invest will come down. Because, as we've already discussed on other agenda items this afternoon, we will start to use our reserves to meet various obligations, and there's considerable amount of reserves sitting in the capital programme currently. And as that goes through, it does mean that the level of money we have to invest will come down. And we will monitor that, and it's a balancing act then. And I suppose to go back to the table about new borrowing, that is dependent on our capital programme delivering on the years in which it was supposed to deliver. And so that again is something that is under continual review. Your question with regards to our credit rating, I'm not sure that local authorities do have a credit rating as such. But when we are making investments to other local authorities, we do scan that financial market to see if we are aware of any particular financial issues within that local authority. And I've no doubt that others will do the same if they were going to lend to us. And currently, we're not flagging up any financial issues. So, there shouldn't be a reason why they wouldn't want to invest in us.
Thank you for that reassurance, Caris. Next is Councillor Good, please.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Caris. Just a quick one from me, really. I think, as we all will probably be increasingly aware, I think it's really important that investments are looked at not just on the returns that we get from them, but on the social and environmental impact that those investments have. So I just wondered what steps we take to ensure that those investments we are making, and I do think it's a prudent thing that we do, and I do think it's a good capital management, but how do we make sure that those do not have a realised consequence from their economic, from their environmental or social impact?
Thank you for that, Councillor Good. Caris, please.
Thank you for that question. It's a very interesting one. That we have a section now actually in our Treasury Management Strategy about environmental, social and governance issues, and that's been put in there in the last 18 months actually, and it was an issue raised, to be fair, at the Governance and Audit Committee because they see the Treasury Management reports. And so we have done work around that, and there is now a section in this strategy which says exactly what you've mentioned is the considerations that we give to that, and certainly our Treasury Management advisors are working with us on that to make sure that we take those things into account when we do make any investments. It's one of the factors that we will take into account when we do make any investments.
Thank you for that, Caris, and I'm sure you can confirm that certainly in recent years, much of that investment has been primarily with other local authorities, so it avoids that risk about us investing in some of the most contested organisations, I would say. So we're not investing in the likes of oil companies, etc., not through our treasury management function or corporations, etc. It's primarily other local authorities. On the Governance and Audit Committee, you flagged the role, and it's a very important role of that committee in terms of considering this treasury management strategy, because of course that committee consists not only of members of this authority, but independent members appointed to ensure there is that independent assessment of our finances, chaired by an independent person as well, independent of this authority. Can you confirm that they've considered this strategy and are content with the strategy and the current arrangements that we have in place to ensure that our investments are safe and reasonable, please?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I can confirm that actually this Treasury Management Strategy that you've got this afternoon did go to Governance and Audit Committee on the 25th of January. And they are, to be fair, they engaged very well with this particular item. And as I said, we made amendments last year to the strategy on the basis of comments that came through from Governance and Audit Committee. And they haven't raised any concerns with regards to the strategy or any risk that they think that we may not be aware of. They agreed this report back at the end of January.
Okay, thank you for that. So the recommendation's been moved and seconded. Is everyone in agreement with those recommendations, please? Okay, thank you all, colleagues. That was the last report on today's agenda. There are no urgent items. I don't think there are. They're Mondrian Officer, in which case we will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance today.